ready? Can you hear me all right? Is this on? Is this thing on? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Keegan, and I'm here to present some information to you on my dissertation, the FARC dissertation. And I have to be very honest with you. I just presented something very similar to this at the largest educational conference in the world, which was about 2 weeks ago in Chicago, Illinois. And I wasn't half as nervous then as I am now, because frankly, I don't care what they think. But I definitely care what you think, because you're actually the people who understand this. So let me say a couple of things before I show you any of this. Number one, I am in education, so some of this may seem like a little bit, oh, geez, what the hell is she talking about? But hopefully I'll explain it well enough that it won't be too boring. And the second thing is I'm really hoping that none of you are surprised by any of this. Because the problem is where I work in education, people are astounded and absolutely blown away by the fact that people could actually have real-life interaction online and have real community, a sense of community and literacies. And that's actually what I do. Literacy, when we think about it, usually we think about writing on a page or something like that. And the family of research and the family of theory that I belong to sees literacy as something that's all-encompassing to your life. So I wanted to set that forth first, that literacy in and of itself is simply being able to use semiotic systems, and literacy is a way of constructing community. Now, I promise I won't talk about literacy ever again in this, really. I know it's a little boring, but I just wanted to get that out there. So I'm going to leave some time at the end of the presentation for you to tell me exactly what you think about this information and this research. Some of it may, like I said, seem a little boring, but 4 years in grad school has compelled me to think that I have to show it to you. So, I teach at Duval College. I teach teachers how to be teachers, and one of the things that I have noticed is that many teachers coming into Teachers College have absolutely no idea about technology in general. I mean, they have a very difficult time understanding how to use an overhead projector, much less understanding communities online and ways of interacting online and the kinds of skills, the life skills you learn online. So it's pretty much a fact that in education and somewhat outside of education, that interactive digital media is often viewed as socially destructive. We all know about that idea of the nerd in his mother's basement eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew. And that's something that that's something that people, researchers like me, are trying to counter. Because honestly, as we move further and further into using digital means of communication and information sharing and community building, it's only going to become more and more important. Starting in the 1970s and 80s, this view began to be applied to video games. And I want to talk about that as a, gosh, this is a little annoying. I want to talk about that as a little side note for a second. So, internet communities have been around since the 1970s. And weblogs or news filters are becoming a more and more influential means of conducting information sharing and having communities built online. Impact of MySpace and Friendster and LiveJournal and now Facebook in education has been huge. You know, you've probably heard about all those stories on MSNBC and whatnot. You know, my daughter, she had a MySpace account and some predator, you know, whatever. So we're having this sort of boogeyman of surrounding technology and technological communities come up not only in general social spaces, but also specifically in education. Okay. So I wrote my doctoral dissertation at the University of Buffalo, and the dissertation was titled, I submitted this with a funnier headline, Multi-Literacies and Communities of Practice at FARC.com. And if you are a FARCer or you know anything about FARC, you'll recognize that I submitted this with a funnier headline. The whole idea of this dissertation was to show the stuffed shirts in education who are quickly falling behind the times as far as online communities are concerned. That a place even like FARC, not someplace nicey-nice like Dig or Slate or any place like that, but a real online community concerned with boobs and beer and laying around and getting laid is really someplace that people can, in fact, learn stuff that is important to their lives. Oops, what did I do? For those of you who don't know what FARC looks like, this is what it looks like up until 2 days ago. And we are going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, because that's a very important part of online communities and ways of making people feel as if they belong. If you're not familiar with this, on the 25th, Drew and Company completely remodeled FARC. And there's been a bit of an uprising because it's A, slow, and B, really white and bright and hard on the eyes. But when I conducted my research, this is what FARC looked like. And if you're not familiar with it, obviously on the far left there, those are the links to stories. This is a news filter, obviously. The tags are a FARC-specific thing that tells you what kind of story you're going to be reading. The headlines are obviously made up by the submitter, and they're supposed to be funny. And then, you know, the comment thread is right over there, and the ads and the boobs and everything else. So the point of this dissertation was to establish places like FARC as non-traditional sites of learning. And the idea is that modern American classrooms are moving further and further away from reality in terms of digital skills. And sites like FARC are places for people to learn and connect and have real social interaction. Again, I said that literacy and social interaction are tied as far as my educational background is concerned. But if you know how to do certain things and you know how to behave in certain ways on a website like FARC, you are more likely to become accepted into that community. And you can learn the things that that community has to offer. What we like to watch, read, and listen to and participate in determines who we are and how we define ourselves. And the family of research this particular dissertation belongs to says that literacy and identity are connected. So the ways in which you express yourself, the ways in which you use semiotic systems and reuse semiotic systems is intimately tied with who you are. The governing theory behind this research postulates that all learning is social. So learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with other people. And there are people called more knowledgeable others and called less knowledgeable others. And all learning is a mediation or a mitigation between the people who know more and the people who know less. And you can be a person who knows more or less at any given time. All right? Additionally, learning has to happen. If it's social, it has to happen in communities. And there has to be apprenticeship and legitimate peripheral participation. And in my dissertation, I don't quite get into it here, legitimate peripheral participation encompasses lurking. So websites where people don't communicate directly, there is still a form of participation. When you jump from lurking to kind of posting now and again, to kind of posting a lot, to really posting, to getting to know the site memes, to going to the parties, and that's a move from legitimate peripheral towards the center of actual participation. Here's some relevance to educational research. I'm sure you really don't care, but that's fine. Basically, education's about 30 years behind the times. There are other areas of non-traditional learning, other sites of non-traditional learning that are being studied by people in education too. Constance Steinkuhl and her husband, Kurt Squire, are looking into video games, and I had mentioned that before. There's a gentleman named James G. who is at the University of Wisconsin-Madison who wrote a book in 2003 called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. And it's an excellent read. It is not at all theoretical. I highly encourage you to get it. It's by Paul Grave. And it's basically, he takes a game, a first-person shooter like Doom, and says even the most, what the media would consider disgusting of video game, the most violent, the most depraved of video game, teaches us something fundamental about how to communicate and how to participate in communities. There's, like I said, Steinkuhler and Squire. There's G, there's Turkle, online identities. There's Finders on girls' magazines like Cosmo. And there's Jenkins on fan fiction. So this area of research has been around for a while. The relevance to you and the internets, all your teachers are wrong. You actually were doing something worthwhile when you were going online. I swear to God. You weren't wasting your time. Yeah, I'm just trying to convince the teachers of that. So let me just quickly get into something that might be a little bit important. Ooh, feedback. Yeah. Might be a little bit important for you to understand some of the data that I'm going to present to you a little bit later. There's a concept called design with a capital D, and it's by these guys in the London group. James G. is one of them. And basically, the concept of design states that you have a semiotic activity. You're working with symbols, whether they're visual symbols, audio symbols, symbols on a page, symbols on a screen. And you interact with those symbols in a way that makes meaning. But because you are who you are and you have innate, personal, different experiences from everybody else, the meaning that comes out of you is going to be different than, say, the meaning that comes out of me or comes out of anybody else. That notion of design, available designs, the sorts of semiotic tools you have to at your disposal, designing the process of actually taking those things and kind of mixing them up in your head and making new meaning, and then the redesigned, the new products that come out of that. So here are some of the participants. This is general information. I'll speed through this. This is the general stuff about my dissertation, how I did it, what I did. I interviewed 14 people on the site. I did it mostly through email. I did do some phone interviews. I did go to 2 FARC parties. I had this kind of data. You're all like, yeah, that's great, fantastic. But this is the part that I'm compelled to show you because I went to graduate school. This is the data collection that I did. And this is the kind of stuff that the site owner told me about why he started FARC. A little known fact is that FARC was almost an Curry website database instead of a news filter. I'm serious, because Drew's fond of Indian curries. But he wanted to do a couple of different things. And this ties in specifically with what it means to be in a community. If you have a leader or a person who founds a community or starts a community who wants to do a certain set of things, the community for the most part is going to be successful, especially if it happens to be an online community that's open 24 hours a day, that you can access all the time, and that a lot of people are on all of the time so that you have that opportunity to interact. And as those of you who know about FARC know, that's a pretty good description of FARC. So Drew wanted a virtual pub, he wanted a business opportunity, and he wanted to create his own world. The other thing is he was instrumental in creating 3 kingdoms. And so when he was done with that, he decided he wanted to do something else. So here's some quotes for him, just basically about world creation and diversity, why he wanted to do this. He feels like it enriches him. He likes talking to these people. And this, the reason I'm showing this to you is because it shows up later when it comes to the actual people who visit the site, people like you, okay? He wanted an intangible that was real for other people that they could go to and create an experience, and it was really cool. So he wanted to have a site for people who maybe didn't feel as if they had any place else to go, or for who were looking for ways of accessing information that they didn't have immediate access to. He makes his income through FARC, and he sees FARC as a small community. I'm not going to read this all to you, but this is all important because it will show up later. It's a virtual pub. One of the things that I found out was FARC was created in part because Drew kept sending out funny links to all of his friends, and it just was filling up people's email addresses. So he decided to have a site where people would simply go to and find out all the funny crap that he's looking at on the internet. Hello? And this is the participant data. This is why they come to FARC, what they do when they get there, and why they stay. I don't think that's me, but that's fine. A lot of times people find the humor to be the thing that attracts them. A lot of times people find that information exchange is the thing that attracts them. They want to come because they want to see what other people have to say. Always hearing the same opinions and the same arguments is nothing but collective ignorance. So there are people who are coming to hear alternate opinions from themselves. And a sense of community. Here's where we're moving into what this presentation is here to inform you about, or at least reinforce, is that FARC really is an online community. It really is a community that people can access and participate in and learn things about. This one was a big one, a negotiated space for democratic interaction. Not only does FARC allow people to hang out, but it allows people to have what people call, what other researchers call, democratic interaction, and that's important in a democracy. I know sometimes it doesn't really feel like we live in a democracy anymore, but really, this is where we're finding it. This is where we're doing it right now online, and that's the important part of why we need places like FARC. Some thread data. These are the kinds of things that I found. The different kinds of interaction. I'm going to focus mostly on the visual ones because they're a little bit easier to read from that distance. I'll just go through these. I can see that this is boring the crap out of you. So, in terms of design and the redesign, on FARC, I found that the redesign of political texts as an expression of identity is something that happens, and the using of the site as a democratic space in which to engage others on political and social differences is something that and if you read anything about what constitutes a community, whether in philosophy or political science or any of those, sort of sociology, those two things are first and foremost on what makes a democratic free society. We can express our identities about the things that happen, and we can use our public spaces as a place to express our identities and our opinions. So obviously this is a poster from They Live, the movie by John Carpenter. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, which I'm sure is like one of you, basically there are aliens and they are invisible to us, but Rowdy Roddy Piper finds some sunglasses that allows him to see that the aliens who are trying to suck our blood and take our money and all that kind of kill us off are in fact among us. On FARC I found this. And as you can see that the word obey is also in this. This is actually, I mean, it's funny. It's a fairly well done photo as well. But it is also an extremely sophisticated political text. And I know that that doesn't seem to be obvious at first. But what this does is it depends on the reader's access of certain common knowledge. You have to know, number one, who George W. Bush is. I think we all know that. But number two, you have to know about this movie, John Carpenter's They Live. You have to know about the whole plot of it. And it depends on certain community knowledge for you to be able to read and decode that literacy piece that I was talking about before. So it's a very sophisticated skill set, and it's extremely valuable when you're looking at things that aren't, in fact, on FARC, but might be somewhere else, like, say, on your television set or in your newspaper. This is the FARC political bingo board, which I thought was hilarious, but this is also something that requires a lot of prior information and shared community knowledge to access. We have filter victim. If you don't know anything about the filters on FARC, you really can't swear, so the filters change it like a word like fuck into FARC, or shit into, shiite, or whatever you want to, yeah. So we have Bud Clinton, we have Quagmire, we have Islamic boogeyman, we have swastika. Anytime a political thread comes up on FARC, everybody comes out of the woodwork, and invariably you're going to see a lot of this sort of thing. And it depends on this, reading this particular information, depends on your access to the community information. I think that's a peace symbol. Doesn't the swastika go down on the right or the other way? It might be. I might have transposed it, yeah, so I'm not sure. I think the point's made, though. Brain dead partisan, I think that's pretty good. But the idea is that if you go back to what I said before about legitimate peripheral participation, when you first get to a website that you're not necessarily familiar with, just as if you first come into a community that you're not necessarily familiar with, you kind of have to learn the rules, you have to learn the in-jokes, you have to learn the ways in which people use language, and that's all very, very important. It may seem silly, it may seem kind of like, oh, haha, isn't this funny, boobs, whatever, but it is, in fact, accessing very specific parts of your brain that are connected to your identity and are connected to your sense of community. This is the Bayeux tapestry. This is the original. This was in a Photoshop thread, so this is like the super old tapestry. And as a political statement, someone Photoshopped it into this, which I thought was wonderful, because this is a political statement on the big box stores, and you have to have, what this demonstrated more than anything else was really, really, really advanced Photoshop skills, at least far beyond what I could do. I'm sure there's other wizards in this room who could do better. But I thought this was very interesting because it seamlessly kind of fits in, and there's an aesthetic value to this as well. And when you start talking about aesthetic value, when you start talking about Photoshop contests where you win because not only were you witty, but you were good at what you were doing, as often happens on some place like Something Awful or FARC, you're now talking about the kind of high and, not mighty, but the kind of high and snobby things that people talk about when they talk about communities and societies, that is art, aesthetics, and visuals. I think everybody knows this. Kind of a low-res version. This is just hilarious in and of itself, but this is something that I found in a FARC thread. And the text, if you can't read it, is, how about expecting our leaders to live by the ethical principles they claim to love so much, you conservative douchebag? If you hate terrorists so much, don't act like one. And of course, that's a picture from Abu Ghraib. Again, very well done, very witty, very funny, very, very complex in terms of a commentary. Like I said, you have to have prior access or access to prior conversations on this site, but you also have to be able to use the conventions of Photoshop, use the conventions of FARC to necessarily express yourself in this way. FARC is also a place to critique media, apolitical media, if there is such a thing. FARC and the redesign of popular media and common media images, I found that as well. And the image, text, and commentary during interaction in these threads as a means of displaying insiderness. One of the ways in which we prove that we are part of a community is we can say that I know something that everybody else knows, therefore I belong, okay? So that's a way of doing this, and we use this sort of stuff on online communities, in online communities, to prove that we do belong to societies. And if there aren't any societies or legitimate cultures online, then people wouldn't necessarily have to bother doing this. So we have this very, very famous image. This is untouched. And then we have this. And then, of course, we have this. Several things going on here. I won't bore you by saying, again, it's very complex. Woo! But you can sort of see where this is going. We also have this. This necessarily involves having, again, prior kind of geek knowledge or science fiction knowledge. You have to know what's being referenced here. So again, it displays, I think this was from a Photoshop, like, these are my bosses, Photoshop them. And this is what came out. You have to have a greater societal knowledge of things that happen to be sci-fi or traditionally geeky or whatever to be able to access this. FARC also uses available designs as a means of commentary. So those sorts of things that are already floating out there, we also on FARC use as ways of commenting on certain in the thread, certain happenings in society. Some images are unchanged and are simply redesigned for the purposes of commenting on specific conversations. So none of these have been touched. Anytime somebody says something kind of boneheaded and somebody corrects them, they usually throw this at the end of the commentary. If you grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you probably saw this on, what is it, NBC? FARC also uses available designs as a means of commentary. They are changed to reflect larger site memes and standards of communication. So we have Notacon, and it's been changed. Shut the fuck up, noob. All right? This is something that's already out there, but it's only been minorly tweaked. And you kind of have to know what's going on FARC when it comes to Notacon, and you have to know what's going on when it comes to shutting the fuck up, noob, that sort of thing. And then, I just love this. I think this is hilarious, because it's like, oh, flattering Deborah, I'm sorry. But again, this is a very sophisticated change. It's very minor, and it does a lot. You know, somebody will say something completely unintelligible, and somebody will post this like, what? Summon Flaming Partisan. Of course, this is a Magic the Gathering card. This is obviously a design that is already an available design that's already out there, and they have changed this slightly. And the text says, use this card to summon a flaming partisan to dogmatically argue a political stance with all the tenacity of a rabid pit bull with a tender buttock in his jaws. Political headline increases this card to +7. Rational arguments and contradictory facts function at a -3. And at the bottom it says, that's exactly what I'd expect a commie fag like you to say, and is your head buried in your ass or in a copy of Mein Kampf. Again, lots of things going on here. Some memes become complex bodies of communication in and of themselves on FARC. And if you're following along or understanding or caring at all what I'm saying, you might know what's coming next. Admiral Akbar, who is in and of himself a completely separate, distinct body of literature on FARC. There has been so much done. He has been designed and redesigned and redesigned and redesigned several different times that he takes on his own system of meaning. This one was one of my favorites. And then that says, an announcement is being made in cliché. I'm not even going to say it. This is another one that took on its own sort of small life. This was the haha Quaker guy. And somebody actually created a template where if you didn't have Photoshop skills, you could just type in whatever you wanted at the bottom, obviously. Haha, I'm writing my dissertation on. And this was, in the dissertation, this was actually an example of more knowledgeable others trying to help less knowledgeable others participate more fully. Because if I don't know how to Photoshop and I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to, I'm kind of lost and I can't participate in that, and some kind soul puts together a template that you can download, that you can put your own thing in, and then put it on FARC. That is a classical Vygotskian, more knowledgeable other relationship, if you want to get into the old educational theory. If not, that is an apprenticeship relationship, apprenticer and apprenticee. And then, of course, we've got a whole system of cliches that have their own life. Some of them have since died, some of them have not. And these are the kinds of visual things that people access as a literature, as a text, as a body on FARC. There are textual memes that function in the same way visual ones do as well. Your dog wants steak. Still no cure for cancer. Hilarity ensues. Jillarity ensues. Duke sucks. Ass hat. The kinds of filtered changes to the language. And then, of course, I submitted this with a funnier headline. If anybody doesn't know what that means, maybe there isn't anybody in here that doesn't know what that means. So I don't want to call anybody out if they don't know. So very quickly, floods of the same article will come in all with funnier headlines, and one person gets in, and then the rejected people show up in the thread and bitch about it. And that's usually what they say. So, why might you care about this? At this point in time, I want to ask you, did you hate high school? Did you think that high school kind of sucked because you were learning stuff that maybe necessarily didn't apply to what you actually liked to do and what you actually liked to engage in? Do you feel like the community at high school or even in grade school or in college or university just wasn't serving your needs? Do you find it easier to read the news online? That sort of thing. If you didn't, good for you. You succeeded at playing the game or doing whatever it is that we do in school, doing school. But if you didn't, what is it about your experiences that you can tell me that I can bring back to the people that make the educational policy, that I can bring back to that enormous educational conference in Chicago and tell people about the ways in which communities function online? At this point, I'm going to turn it over to you. I've given you a small taste of what my dissertation was about. There's a whole hell of a lot more, but I don't really want to bore you with multiliteracies and modalities of meaning and all that kind of bullshit. So at this point in time, I would really like to ask you, what do you think about all this? Nothing. I don't have anything. We love it. It's great. Thank you, Kelly. Yes?
This site captures so much that ongoing commentary on what they're seeing. They're not waiting to be told what to think or having it packaged for them. And in fact, there's an incredible rejection of the slickness and the spin doctrine and everything that goes on with overproduced media. And there's continual partial attention on the part of everybody nowadays where they're continually not only hearing what they have to say, but almost immediately having that wonderful ironic voice that says, this is only partially true. How can I make fun of it? How can I bring it into my worldview that I know I'm being lied to all the time?
Right.
What do I make of that?
Excellent. Yeah, well, that's sort of the aim that I was going for. I mean, it's pretty clear that if you spend any amount of time in FARC threads, you have to wade through a lot of noise, and that's sort of part and parcel of what the place is about. But at the same time, you definitely see a lot of very insightful, incisive commentary on what's going on in the world, what's going on in specific societies or communities, and it's a really refreshing thing. And I'm not saying it's specific to FARC. Other places do this. I just happen to pick FARC because a lot of people find it highly offensive, If you go to another site like, say, Metafilter, they're always downing on FARC, Oh, take that juvenile shit to FARC, I don't need it here, that kind of thing. And I really kind of wanted to take the approach that James G. took when he looked at video games, and I wanted to take the most offensive example I could possibly, and I also was a FARCette, I have to admit. I had insider status. But it is one of the things that is valued on FARC and places like FARC. If you can deconstruct an image that has been put together so carefully. I don't know if any of you were FARCers or FARCettes at the time when McDonald's had a banner ad that had some guy holding like a Big Mac, and it said, "I'd hit it" next to it. And everybody was like, I can't believe me. McDonald's has no idea what they're saying, blah, 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 blah. And you know, plenty of people on FARC were like, McDonald's has every idea of what they're saying, and here's why. Here's why I can deconstruct this. And this is one of those things. This is one of those literacies. What you're talking about is one of those literacies, those things you learn on a place like FARC.com that you're not necessarily going to learn in your high school English classroom. You're not going to learn how to, you know, deconstruct an image of Domokun yelling at this little orange tail. You're not going to learn necessarily how to deconstruct an image like the George Bush mission accomplished image, possibly in a media studies class. But the point is that people are doing this so much every day on their own time. Why can't we take that kind of energy that we see and transfer it into our schools? That's what I'm interested in, maybe not necessarily what you're interested in. Other questions or comments?
Like how you don't have to have an image to participate.
Right. You actually can do it whether or not you have the enormous, you know, mad hacker skills of being able to do whatever you want, or if you're just kind of like me who kind of knows something about computers but wanders in. You know, you can participate regardless of your level of expertise, and that's one of the welcoming things about a site like that. Yeah.
I was thinking that the way you're phrasing that question might sort of lead to kind of
Okay.
sometimes everyone hates high school, partly because you're a teenager at that point, but also because sometimes there's some stuff you just have to sit down and learn in a traditional way. Because I went to a Montessori middle school, and they were trying to use like creative techniques to get us engaged, and there was some stuff that we just had to sit down and learn.
Oh, that makes sense.
Instead of like sort of making them into sort of competing, how can you get them to work together?
Right.
So that, you know, kids can say, okay, I have to do this crap, fine, but at least I know that this other thing that I'm doing is being respected also.
Right, and I completely agree. I didn't want to try to bore people with lots of technical language, but the actual way that I phrased this in my dissertation has a lot to do with the idea of companion technologies in schools, and also utilizing multiliteracies, which is something that if you really care about, I'll explain to you, not necessarily if you don't. But just think about it as not necessarily being able to just read words on a page, but music and visuals and all together all at once. And using that as a means of getting the stuff that you just have to sit down and learn, doing it through that way. This was just sort of a way of not trying to bore the crap out of people in here. But thank you, that's a very good point.
When I walked in, you had a slide up about all learning being social. Basically, in high school, you're punished for social learning. That's called cheating and so on. So it's, yeah, it's strange that, you know, the skill that's really useful is the skill that's taught.
Right, and we've had movements in education where we're trying to get back to cooperative learning and collaborative learning. But if you go into 9 out of 10 classrooms in the US, you're going to see a row of desks, and you're going to see examination papers and projects necessarily having to be done individually. Now, if you walk into some like architecture firms or, you know, any place like that, you're not necessarily going to see that. So we have a very strange way of training our students to perform, and then we kind of toss them into a completely different atmosphere. And you kind of get more practice with communal, community, social learning and sharing on a place like this.
Yeah, a colleague of mine is a professor at Cal State Northridge, and she's doing a 4-year study of students as they come in, undergraduate, all the way through till they graduate. And her hypothesis is that the better networked, the better connected students will finish school at a greater percentage and will have better grades than those that aren't. And that's what she's trying to study.
My hunch is that she's going to be completely right now.
Yeah.
I don't have any empirical data to back that up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting problem that you do. You have even ETS is the Educational Testing Service, and that in fact is what kind of creates most of the standardized tests in the US at this point in time. And they came out with something called the ICT, which basically tests your internet literacy. And it's hilarious because it's done, you know, can you evaluate a website for its veracity? Can you evaluate a website for how long it's been around? Who it, you know, that kind of critical inspection of information on the internet, but you're forced to do it alone. You have to take the test by yourself, and it's a closed system. You don't actually go onto the internet and do this. You do it in a setup that is a closed system. And it just, to me, I'm looking at the test and I'm like, oh God. Because nobody would actually really do that. I mean, you can get through it, you can get the right answers, you can pretty much get what they want you to get. But if you're really doing something that means something to you, if you're really researching a topic, or if you're really interested in something, you're going to use those network spaces. You're going to ask people for help, essentially. Other questions or comments?
We'll go to LAN parties and hook up a bunch of systems and play together.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of people, like some of my friends, will go online and play with people online and like online gaming.
Right.
I see that more and more.
Yeah. It's, Constance Steinkühler. I mentioned her name before. Her research is specifically on massively multiplayer online role-playing games.
Sure.
And her dissertation is freely available online, and it's not as theory-heavy or hard to read. And she specifically talks about the benefits of doing that. The benefits of utilizing this kind of instantaneous accelerated information, and the ways in which we learn to behave properly. You know, there are rules for behaving at LAN parties and behaving online. Behave properly, but also verify whether or not the information or the actions we are performing are indeed correct for that situation.
How was your research accepted by the people you presented it to in Chicago, and also your dissertation committee?
Okay.
What did they think of it?
My dissertation committee was comprised of an interesting group of people. The chair of my dissertation was a nun whose favorite thing in the world is the Ramones in science fiction. She's a huge Neil Stephenson fan. So she was all over it. She was like, this is fantastic. The other two people were far more traditional, and they had a lot of problems with, I'm still not seeing the connection to school. I'm still not seeing the connection to everyday life. And I had to really work very hard, and where it may seem sort of intrinsic or obvious to you guys, they necessarily didn't see the connections because they don't use this kind of technology. At Chicago, I pretty much get laughed at. It's pretty funny. But the payback is that I get to say, where everybody, you know, you get like a group of grammar school teachers all wearing like, you know, long denim jumpers with an apple on it, and they're all sitting and want to learn about reading and literacy. And I come up there and I'm like, yeah, my dissertation's on a dark. It's another word for fuck. And we talk about beer and boobs and sex. And then it's just like this, the horror on people's faces is wonderful. Some people are interested in it. There are people doing work in game theory, which is not necessarily education, but it's kind of separate. And it is, in fact, related, but not the same. They're more welcome with it. But as time has gone on, I've been doing this for about 5 years, it's getting better and better. So, I mean, most of the time people are like, they'll give a dissertation at anything these days. Other questions or comments?
Common criticism of these kinds of things, what sweeping statement, is that it's all very ephemeral, that there's sound bites and tiny bits of information like tiles in a mosaic, and are people ever getting the big picture because of this?
Right.
From your studies and people at FARC, and you've talked about that they have to have a certain knowledge base to even be able to put together that particular they live reference and so forth. How are they getting that big picture when it seems that all they are exposed to is these tiny bits?
That's the field that I work in is only 10 years old, 11 years old. And it's starting to come together because there are people in more traditional areas of literacy and reading who are starting to see the same kinds of patterns or similar patterns to what's going on at FARC. So that's kind of what you have to do in research anyway. You have to take, you know, stand on the shoulder of giants, the people who came before you, who did something kind of like what you did, but not exactly like what you did. And that's where we're borrowing maps from reading, from literacy, from media studies, and we're kind of overlaying it on top of multiliteracies and digital literacies and DV. and changing it where necessary. So give it another 10 years, and we're going to have a very clear picture of what happens, barring any, like, you know, completely, like the internet shuts down, you know, something like that. Okay. Well, oh, quick. I saw several hands.
Kind of related to the couple of the questions, what connections did you make between the social learning that goes on online and the social learning that happens at the parties? Because that was a big thing for me with the local Cleveland Freenet had picnics where I would actually meet these people, and that was a big way of learning how to socialize.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you already are friends when you show up, and that's a big comfort to people who maybe have difficulty or are just kind of coming into a huge place where there's you know, people and I don't know anybody. One of the funny things, and this is not original to my study, actually Lori Kendall figured this one out too, is that most of the time people are referred to by their FARC names at FARC parties. Only if you specifically request that you call somebody something like, hi, my name is Kelly, but I'm FARC, I'm O'Flinky. Most people will call me O'Flinky unless they're trying to get my attention, like, across the room. You find that. You find some cliches from FARC translate into real life, and you find that there's one of the parties I went to had an outlier who had been banned from FARC, like, forever and ever, amen. And he still showed up, and he still was wearing a shirt that had the ha-ha Quaker guy on it, and he still really, you know, was really passionate about still being in the community. So the biggest thing, I mean, I have a whole bunch of things I could say to you, but I think they're going to cut me off. The biggest thing is that you're already walking into a community that you belong to. So there's a comfort factor and there's an ease factor there. On top of which, almost all FARC parties happen at bars. So there's also the social lubricant of liquor at work as well. Done? All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Actually, I had a question.
Oh, you do?
Oh. Yeah, I'm just the guy with the microphone. But
nice.
You'd mentioned how you wanted to see this brought more into our education system.
Absolutely.
And I, as a person who absolutely loathed high school, would love to ask you, do you have any ideas?
Yes,
Could you
I
go
do.
into that a
That's
little,
the
please?
7th chapter of my dissertation. I do. I don't know if I would necessarily use FARC in a high school classroom, unless it was a very liberal school. I think probably, however, you could use more, I want to say less boobies and beer-centric sites, more sanitized sites. But I think one of the big things when it comes to using this in a classroom is respect for the medium and respect for the skills that are taught through the medium. So could you use a site like Dig in a classroom? Absolutely. There's this thing called web questing, and that's kind of like, oh my gosh, we can find things on the internet. Let's show our kids how. One of the big things, though, I come from a theoretical family in education that says it's a really good idea to let your kids show you how they use it first and then design lessons around it. So if you have an assignment where your job is to get kids to be able to write, say, a traditional 5-paragraph essay in an English language arts classroom, the idea is to let them write it however they feel they're most comfortable first and almost like translate it, almost like going from French to English, but you're kind of going from, like, you know, kitty leet to something else. So there are the traditional applications of just bringing something in like that, but there's also the idea that students are probably the best teachers when it comes to that kind of stuff as well. But if you have more specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them when. No? All right. I mean, could you imagine going into a high school classroom and flipping open your laptop and sort of logging into a place like a teacher-created web space like this and being able to have flame wars with people from Japan? I mean, would that help you with certain things? Yeah. It kills the cool. That's. Yeah, it kills the cool. You said something before about that false dichotomy between what actually, do you hate high school or did you have to just sit and learn this stuff, that kind of thing. The one caveat I do have about using a site like this or using these kinds of principles in a classroom has to do with the fact that you simply do need to make your kids that, yeah, you're kind of killing the cool a little bit. I know you go on other sites. I know you do other stuff outside of school, but I don't want to get arrested and I want to keep my job. So this is what we're going to do, and it's close to what you like to do outside. I know lots of people, though, too, who use like Civilization in their classroom. My husband's actually a social studies teacher, and he's used segments of Civilization in the classroom and had kids play it and just said, okay, you're just going to go in the corner and play Civilization. Okay, I want you to tell me about the Chinese, you know, and then he had a that went with it. That kind of killed the cool a little bit, but it was a hell of a lot better than sitting there and reading out of a textbook. So I think once you say, all right, listen, I'm going to go this far for you because I recognize that these are your skills and this is what you're best at, but you got to come this far for me too.
Have you seen how the History Channel now has histories, mysteries and stuff like that, where they'll go back and show you like how history was wrong, and they'll go like, this is what really happened.
Yeah.
There was a neat picture how they said they found the tomb of Jesus, and then right on 4chan the next day was a picture of the Bible with the Mythbusters busted sign right over it.
Right. Absolutely. It travels quick, you know. That's another great, you know, that's a great use for in the classroom, you know. Can you find sites like thememoryhole.org? Or Robert Lewin has a book that he put out called Lies My Teacher Told Me, and there's all kinds of companion sites that go with that.
Yeah, it makes me feel like I'm actually learning a little bit better. Like,
yeah.
I know what is true because everybody is putting their input in.
Right.
Like, oh, this is not true, this is what really happened, or you got it wrong, here's what really happened.
That's the negotiated space for democratic interaction that I was talking about before. I mean, it's also the principles of what happened in this dissertation apply to the teacher as well. If you want to draw a parallel between the site owner and a teacher that wants to put some of this stuff into the classroom, you can go back to the idea of the virtual pub. You can go back to the idea of world creation and diversity. And you can't necessarily make money in a classroom, but you can certainly achieve a certain amount of success with your students that could translate to, you know, like be parallel to a monetary success. You know, I don't necessarily care so much about making $25 off of you, but if I can get you to understand a certain concept, then that's my return. So there's also the parallel between people who run these kinds of sites and what their principles are and why they start them and why they keep them going, and people who are teachers in classrooms who want to use those principles. New literacies teaching is what we call it. Anything else? My premature round of applause. You don't have to clap again. That's it. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it. Oh.